Well, on Friday, we saw what happens when the Cardinals pitching doesn't hold up. Is there a concern in the long term that could end up happening to the Redbirds this season? What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Friday evening, April 4th, 2025, and the Cardinals had their first real stinker of the season on Friday. The home opener for the Boston Red Sox went the local team's way, 13-9 the final. The Cardinals did mount a bit of a rally there in the ninth inning to try to make things interesting, but ultimately fell short with a game-ending double play, snuffing out any chances of a miraculous comeback that you might have had. What do we make of the situation now for the Cardinals and their pitching staff? This is the first real blow-up that has cost them, at least in the way that it felt like the game was over long before you got to the ninth inning. The two losses you had previous to this one were at least extra inning games. Now, your bullpen was partially responsible, if not primarily responsible, for those losses in the end with the way that they kept coughing up runs in extra innings. But this felt like the first game where start to finish, you knew the pitching was an issue. Some of those other games, it may have crept up later on in the game, and you could say, look, there have been plenty of games where the Cardinals have given up way more runs than you should necessarily give up if you're thinking you're going to come away a winner, and that's true. But this one, start to finish, felt like one where you just couldn't avoid it. You couldn't escape it if you were the St. Louis Cardinals, talking about and looking at the way the pitchers performed, giving up 8 walks in this game to the Boston Red Sox as they get tabbed for 16 hits and 13 runs, all of them earned. There was really nobody that did their job in terms of the Cardinals pitching staff today. So, can the Cardinals pitching hold up? That's going to be the topic of conversation for tonight as we maybe dive in and tell you, basically, I just want to kind of go through the roster right now on the pitching side and take assessment of things and say, like, what's the belief or the confidence level that the players with the roles that they're currently in are going to be able to fulfill those roles in a way that can allow the Cardinals to be successful? Because one thing we did see on Friday, once again, this offense is legit. I really do think the more of a sample size we get and the more data that we're going to find on this offense, the more we're going to come away thinking, you know what, might be pretty good. Maybe it is the case that all those hitters that we were wondering if you can get some of those guys to take a step forward, and a lot of them maybe end up doing it, and it results in having a pretty robust offense 1 through 9. I think the Cardinals are not particularly far away from that, where right now I'm just looking at today's lineup. You had 4 guys that were in this lineup, and they're looking at it. Well, okay, 3 guys that were in the lineup to start. One of them came in, Luke Baker, as a pinch hit. But 4 of those guys with an OPS better than 1,000 right now. Victor Scott, Jordan Walker are better than 800. Donovan and Burleson are at 770 or above. And you're waiting on Mason Wynn and Wilson Contreras to lock it in, but those two combined today to go 3 for 9 and drive in a run. So, and score 2 of them, by the way. So, like, those guys are even maybe coming around. That's a 1 through 9 that you think should be pretty dangerous, and they do it against Walker Buehler today. The Boston Red Sox had to get into their bullpen. All this to say, offensively, there is still a lot to like about where the Cardinals are, and maybe this Brant Brown hitting coaching shift can allow the Cardinals to unlock their potential at the plate. But I don't see very many ways the Cardinals are going to be successful if you allow the types of pitching performances, or you have the types of pitching performances that the Cardinals did on Friday. 8 walks. It was a nightmarish performance, and it was true from the starting pitcher, Erick Fedde, to a guy who's going to be in your rotation soon, Steven Matz, and then every other reliever that came in struggled. So I want to take a look at everybody and kind of take stock. I know it's early. I know that we shouldn't overreact to one outing in the same way that I said, don't overreact to the first week of the season with the rotation going as smoothly as it did. It's liable to self-correct. And the question is going to be where the Cardinals find their level. Is the level something that puts this pitching staff, let's say it can rank 15th through 18th in MLB? That ends up being more than enough, I think, with the type of offense the Cardinals are purported to have at this point. Now, if the pitching staff is closer to that, like 20th or 25th in ERA, and right now I just don't know between the rotation and the bullpen if there's a strength to be had or if it's going to be kind of middling on both ends. Your bullpen was great last year. Your rotation wasn't even quite middling. I think they ended up 23rd or 24th in starter ERA. now the bullpen may not be a strength, and then you kind of look around and go, okay, can we win every game 8-7? Well, not if you allow 13 runs. They might be able to score you 8, but what about the 7? How can you turn the 13 into a 7 more consistently? So we're going to get into all that on tonight's episode of B-Schaeff Daily. But before we jump into the meat and potatoes of the episode, I want to let you know that Kevin Foley is your man when it comes to windows in the St. Louis area. For over 20 years, Universal Windows Direct has been upgrading homes across St. Louis. But if you want the best in the business, you need to talk to Kevin. With expert advice, unbeatable deals, and a passion for perfect windows, Kevin will help you find the perfect fit for your home. And right now, if you buy 2 windows, you'll get 2 free. Plus, you can ask about their special financing offers. So don't wait. The storm's going on throughout the spring. I don't know if they're stopping anytime soon. But what it means is you might be noticing some leaks around your home, things of that nature, and windows may be the culprit. So if you're in the market for new windows, call or text 618-520-1234 today to schedule your free estimate, and you'll be saying, I love my windows with Universal Windows Direct. That's Kevin Foley, 618-520-1234. The dude is a huge Cardinals fan, and you cannot go wrong giving him your business and supporting B-Schaeff Daily when it comes to getting those windows right in your place of residence. All right, let's talk about this Cardinals pitching staff, which, no pun intended, or maybe it is intended, was a little leaky as well on Friday. Yikes. So Erick Fedde, I mean, he looked really good in his first start of the year. This one was not. I wouldn't use those terms. He allowed, I think it was like single, double, got an out in there somewhere, and then a couple of homers in a row, back-to-back jacks. 5-run first inning. Erick Fedde leaves this one after 3 innings. He walked 4 batters. Oh, E-Fed. That's not going to play. And so the ERA now up to 7 for the season, even though he was like 6 innings, and I don't even know if he gave up a run his first outing, maybe 1. He was really solid that first outing. Now, well, the ERA has ballooned, right? Kind of the same thing that happened to Sonny Gray, where he ended his last start with that grand slam to Logan O'Hoppe, and suddenly you look up and his ERA is 5.5. Only 2 games, only 2 starts. But those are guys that are supposed to be at the top of your rotation. I mean, they're the first 2 that the Cardinals threw out there this year, and, we'll see how they find their own levels. But then Steven Matz comes in, 3 innings. He walks a batter, a couple of runs, 4 hits, got knocked around a bit. The one I think, and we'll talk about it, I'm going to go position by position or really name by name through this pitching staff. Ryan Fernandez is the one that I think you keep a close eye on right now. And I'll say this, I'm recording this late Friday night. I wouldn't be stunned to see a roster move sometime this weekend, maybe even before Saturday's game, when you consider how taxed the bullpen is. Now, I haven't really looked at the Memphis roster, and really it would be their game log and their box scores to see who's been pitching and who might be fresh, because it could be as simple as just having a fresh arm that you can call upon, and I don't really know offhand who's been utilized recently. So at least most of them got the day off, it would appear, on Friday. I assume this would have been weather-related, that they only played 7 innings, unless they played a doubleheader that no, it looks like they did play a doubleheader. So that's not very good for the old bullpen if you're the St. Louis Cardinals hoping to call upon some of those guys from AAA. Quinn Matthews, jeepers creepers. He did okay, 3 2/3 innings, and just gave up 1 run. But if we were complaining about walks at the major league level today for the Cardinals, how about 6 walks in 3 2/3 for Quinn Matthews in one of those games? Now, I'll say this. The Memphis Redbirds in 2 7-inning games only allowed 2 total runs, 1 run in each game. Quinn did a nice enough job working around those walks, and Rodri Munoz ended up with a save in that game, which was a makeup from Thursday when they didn't play, I assume due to weather. In the other game, McGreevy started, so take McGreevy off your list if you were hoping to just get some quick, innings out of somebody. Maybe they call him up and just have him be a long relief option if guys like Steven Matz are spent. That's not a thing that's going to be in play. 5 innings, no runs allowed. McGreevy was actually really good, at least by the box score. Obviously, I didn't watch this game, but 3 hits allowed, 1 walk, goose eggs with 5 Ks. Mosqueda and Ryan Ludus pitched. So there's going to be some guys that they could potentially go to, despite the fact that Memphis had to play 2 games today. They didn't use all too many in their bullpen. Ryan Fernandez, though, I bring him up in the context of, could the Cardinals option somebody? I'm not necessarily saying I believe they're going to option Ryan Fernandez to this point, but it could happen at some point this year. He had a 3.5 ERA last year, pitched in 62 games for the Cardinals, was really good, better than a strikeout per inning. But they couldn't option him even if they wanted to last year because he was a Rule 5 pickup. Now that's not applicable, and he does have options, and so if you go with the Memphis shuffle and shuttle some guys up, he could be eligible for that, and he's allowed at least an earned run in 4 consecutive appearances now, dating back to, 3 straight appearances of the 4 that he's had all season, dating back to March 31st. And this one was a particularly rough one. 2/3 of an innings, couple of hits, a walk, and all 3 of those runs end up coming around to score against Ryan Fernandez. So, it's just tricky because when you look at the bullpen last year, it was a strength. It was really one of the primary reasons that they won 83 games instead of maybe losing 83 or losing like 88. Ryan Helsley was fantastic. Jojo Romero was great, and you had Andrew Kittredge. But Fernandez ended up kind of turning himself into the fourth horseman a little bit last year, and it kind of came out of nowhere. Really impressed by what he gave the team, but this year he's off to kind of the opposite start of that and has walked a batter in each of his last 3 appearances, which is, not really what you want out of your bullpen guys that are supposed to be mixing into that kind of 7th and 8th inning role, ideally, and trying to find a way to replace Andrew Kittredge. Like, Fernandez was one of those guys that you wanted to see maybe take a step up and more consistently be in that setup mix. And he's got a 14.7 ERA now through 4 games. John King got hit around, and if he's not getting lefties out, that's kind of supposed to be a calling card for him, and he wasn't able to do much of that today. He did get through an inning of work, but allowed 4 hits, 2 runs, and also walked the batter. And Chris Roycroft came in, and as everybody else did for the Cardinals today, had to walk somebody. He only faced 3 batters, walked 1, gave up a hit to 1, but did record an out. Steven Matz, I kind of glossed over, but he did get him through 3 innings, but a couple of runs allowed as, ERA went up. But it was his second appearance and still a 2.57 ERA for the season. But, I want to take a look right now at the Cardinals, and maybe I can just pull up the team stats to do this rather than the roster, because we'll give you the updated numbers for everybody. It's not as though the numbers are going to be the end-all, be-all. For some of these starting pitchers, they've only thrown once anyway. But I want to ask the question of, okay, if we're looking into whether or not this team's pitching can hold up, let's go individual by individual and kind of cast out our opinions on kind of where some of these guys are. And look, I'll try to be relatively conservative, too, in terms of I'm not going to go crazy ripping somebody that, I think could probably figure it out. But I'm also going to try to be realistic with the upside of some of these guys that are struggling and question whether or not that upside is going to be realized in short order. So Sonny Gray, through 2 starts, he's got a 5.7 ERA. I'm not particularly worried about him because, again, if you maybe made a different decision than have him face Logan O'Hoppe in the last game that he pitched, what would his ERA be in that situation? I know that is not necessarily a reasonable way to do it, but if you go with somebody else and they get that last out, strand the bases loaded, or suddenly you didn't give up any of those runs, right? I think he would have been 6 innings, 1 run. And I guess I can't say the last out, right? Because there was nobody out at that point. Sonny didn't even get an out in the 7th. But 6 innings, 1 run would have been a perfectly good line for him, but he was so efficient that they did let him try it in the 7th inning, and it didn't work out. But if you ask me, all right, honest to goodness, what's your prediction for what Sonny Gray is going to do this year? I would say, yeah, probably around what he did last year, 3.8 ERA, which is maybe disappointing to some, but I would say that would be perfectly satisfactory if he ends up around there, and he could certainly even be better than that. The strikeout rate is still very impressive, 15 Ks and 11 innings for Sonny Gray. Ryan Helsley, 3 games, he's been great, no runs allowed. I think he's going to continue to be great, and you just hope he's on the team the whole year because the Cardinals are still in the mix in July, and they're not looking to trade him away. Phil Maton has been really good. 4 games, 4 goose eggs, and he's actually racked up 6 strikeouts in 4 innings, which is, I don't know if he profiles to be quite that good of a strikeout guy. he could end up being the diamond in the rough where you get, the Andrew Kittredge replacement at the bell by paying him a couple $1 million. That would be wonderful for the Cardinals' purposes. But that's kind of like, let's get into the bullpen, and then I'll circle back with the rotation. Helsley is your ninth inning guy. Maton's going to have to be part of that setup mix, especially if he continues to be more effective than some of the other right-handers that are in the conversation. And then I'll scroll past Steven Matz for now because ultimately I think he's going to be in a starter role, even if it takes a little bit of time to get him in there. They said April 16th, so I believe that's a Wednesday coming up, day game at that point. I think against the Tigers, but I usually am not a schedule reader, so I'm not going to get too bogged down in that. Skip over some of these starting pitcher names and then focus in a little bit more on the bullpen. So I talked about Fernandez. Again, what's the context of what you're hoping to get from Ryan Fernandez? And then that determines if he's going to be able to fulfill that role. If you said kind of what you were hoping for from him last year, be that kind of middle reliever and, just give you a good 3.5, 4 ERA and just kind of be able to answer the bell, right? Well, right now, I think you're going to need more from him than that. I think he's part of that 7th and 8th inning mix, and he's having trouble with command a little bit. And some of these walks that he's given up, I've been watching him. It's like he's getting squeezed a little bit on a 3-2 pitch today. Those things are going to happen, though. You got to be able to hit those locations and not let that kind of spiral and snowball against you. I think Ryan Fernandez is going to be better than a 14 ERA, guys, but if he was your answer for, okay, Kittredge is gone, we can really elevate him full-time into the 8th inning guy, I think the Cardinals anticipated him being part of the mix, not necessarily bestowing that role upon Ryan Fernandez, but right now, he's certainly going through it. And if you didn't already mentally catalog that he would be somebody kind of in a higher pecking order coming into the season, you might have already looked at him as somebody that you would option to Memphis to try to get the command worked out, but they saw a full season of what he's capable of being, and so it wouldn't shock me either if the Cardinals were trying to wait that out and really get Ryan Fernandez going, because again, who do you have down below in terms of relief pitchers that you're really eager and anxious to get moved up? Like Ryan Ludus has done a nice job. I think Roddery Munoz can end up being an intriguing relief arm, and I like that the Cardinals are using him out of the bullpen to try to simplify his process compared to when he was a starter with the Marlins. Like, you've got some guys with some raw abilities that I think are going to be called upon at times, but, in terms of upside, Chris Roycroft is one of those guys that was maybe higher on the list, and it's still a pretty small sample for him, but in 4 games, he kind of seems like the guy that they have used to try to get out of some jams at times where he doesn't necessarily always have to pitch a full inning, but he can pitch a few more games if he's not necessarily going multiples or, being tasked as deep into his outings. 3 innings over the course of 4 appearances, but he's given up a couple of earned runs and has the ERA sitting there at 6. Hasn't been quite the strikeout arm. We know he's got dynamic stuff. We know he can induce the ground balls when needed. So is he kind of in that fireman role? We'll see. I think he can fill that role, but you've got to be able to consistently throw strikes, and he's walked a couple of batters in 3 innings as well. So everybody in this bullpen is really kind of dealing with, for the most part, the walks issue. Kyle Leahy's walked a couple of guys, and even though he's been really good in his 3 appearances, JoJo Romero has walked a couple of guys. They've been, and some of that, I think one of them for JoJo on Monday was maybe even intentional as part of that 10th inning. But you're kind of looking through this going, are you a little underwhelmed and maybe uncertain that Roycroft can ascend because it feels like he's just regressing ever so slightly? It is so very early. If I had to project Chris Roycroft, I'd say he's going to be an ERA of around, 4 at the end of the season, maybe even like a 3.9. I'd still say I'm a believer in him. And I'm still a believer in Fernandez, but maybe not a 3.5 ERA like he had last year. Maybe it's more in the low 4s. And that is passable. Like, you can have a number of those types of guys in your bullpen, but you're looking to have 3-4 guys that are really going to be part of the lockdown crew. And right now, is that shaping up to be Helsley, Maton, Romero, who's still sitting 2.7 ERA, just giving up 1 run through his first 3 appearances. Those 3 guys, and then you're kind of you're searching for it. If Fernandez is not locked in right now, if Roycroft is not locked in right now, we haven't seen Riley O'Brien yet because he missed a lot of the spring with another injury. So we'll keep him, our tabs on him at AAA. Kyle Leahy, I still think fits into that mold of being able to give you multiples and get you through as a bridge guy toward the back end. but you don't necessarily want to change his role to elevate him into being somebody that's now, tasked with eighth inning duties. John King from the left side, again, I mean, that one's a little bit tricky, and you've got Liberatore in your rotation right now, too, so we thought that was maybe going to be a role where Libby could ascend into being a setup man from the left side, but if he's in your rotation, that does fall upon John King to join alongside JoJo Romero and be that role, because Steven Matz is going to be long relief. They're going to keep him stretched out. Like, this is kind of the trickle-down effect of what some of those decisions were. I fully agreed with giving Libby the opportunity, but it kind of takes for granted, like, well, John King's going to have to be that lefty because you don't really have the next man up, to be able to fill that second lefty role that is jumping off the page at you. So that's your 8-man bullpen. We kind of identified everybody. Helsley, I think he's going to be just fine. I think he's going to be great. Phil Maton, I think he'll be really good. Fernandez, obviously he's got to be much better than what he's been. Same thing with Chris Roycroft. Definitely the case for John King. And there's nobody coming to rescue you as long as Libby's in the rotation. So, yeah, you can option him down, but kind of figured he could be that second lefty when JoJo's unavailable. He's in a prime spot against some good lefties in the opposing lineup. JoJo, I think, is going to be more than fine, and he's, again, everybody's kind of working through those early jitters with the walks, but I still have a good degree of faith in JoJo Romero to end up having a good season. And then you look at Leahy and Matz, and they're kind of your long guys that are mopping up as many of these innings as they can. Last year's bullpen was a top 10 unit. I don't know if that's quite a top 10 unit, though. I think you're closer to the middle and maybe not on the high end of the middle necessarily, unless you get guys like Roycroft, Fernandez, or whoever may come up from AAA for any of the guys that are on this list to be able to kind of get back to that expectation. Helsley, Maton, and Romero, I think, will be here all year, or I say they're not going to Memphis. Leahy, I think, has certainly acquitted himself nicely. King, Fernandez, Roycroft, certainly any of those three, I think, are guys that could be a little bit malleable in terms of options. And then, Fernandez is certainly one that, with the struggles right now, it's one of those deals where they may end up looking in that direction. I would love to see Ryan Fernandez lock it in, but this is what we're talking about. I mean, if you don't have a top 10 bullpen, you always compare it to last year when you won 83 games and say, well, how's this team going to be better than last year? Or conversely, how might it end up falling well short of last year if you were painting a picture and like carving out that path mentally, trying to predict what would happen? It's why I said there's so much variance to this season, because while there's variance to the offense, and I was high on what the offense could be coming in, and every expectation or hope that I would have had for it has so far been panning out. The lineup looks really good and is exceeding pretty much every expectation. But if the bullpen takes a huge step back and the rotation stays where it was or doesn't have, even if it's still around that 24th, 25th in ERA, how many innings does that rotation throw? Because the veterans in last year's rotation were guys like Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson that you knew were going to take the ball and get you through 6, even if it meant that they gave up 4 or 5 runs. And I remember kind of going back and forth with people last year on YouTube in the comments where people would say, well, why does that matter, Brenden? You keep talking about this getting through 6 as though it means anything. If he gave up 5 runs, that means his ERA for that outing is like 8. What's so special about that? You find out what's so special about that in a game like Friday where Erick Fedde only goes 3. And, most of that was just because of the number of pitches he threw in the first inning. And next time you have even a semi-stressful inning, it ends up being one of those deals where you're worn down by that point. And Ollie Marmol knows he's got Steven Matz there needing kind of a lengthy opportunity at some point anyway. So takes the ball and goes. Good for Steven Matz, by the way, a guy who's been through injury in years past. Durability has been a concern. And right now his role is basically to go, hey, once you've kind of had a few days of rest, you could be throwing 3 or 4 or 5 innings at any given moment. Just be ready, which is kind of maybe a difficult task for somebody who has had the injury history of Steven Matz, but he's taking the ball and he's getting it figured out until he gets back into that rotation. So I credit him for, grinding the way that he has over his first couple of opportunities. But if I'm comparing everything back to last year's bullpen and anchoring to that and saying, all right, better or worse, I think Ryan Helsley can be just as good. I think Phil Maton can be a good version of Phil Maton, but I'd still probably notch him a little bit below that Kittredge role. If he was replacing Andrew Kittredge, that's going to be a tough act to follow. So maybe in that neighborhood, and that could be somewhat wishful thinking or just optimistic thinking to say, yeah, okay, he'll replace Kittredge for you. And then beyond that, though, it's like, can Ryan Fernandez replicate last year's Ryan Fernandez? No, I don't have faith that he's going to do that right now. And that was a really important role in last year's bullpen. Jojo Romero, yeah, I think he can be the guy that he was last year. But right now you're seeing a lesser version of King. I think even a little bit of a lesser version of Roycroft, who was not necessarily heavily involved the entire season, but you had high hopes for, and the Cardinals certainly saw a lot in him that they liked. So outside of the big three, I think I would say I'm lesser on just about every role in terms of my confidence, except for Kyle Leahy, who I think is going to continue to be a solid arm. But that's more of the low leverage position that it doesn't mean quite as much to the success or failure of the unit as a whole. You got to find the guys that are going to be able to fit into those leverage spots. And right now, I would say King, Roycroft, and Fernandez are not on the better side of questionable in terms of, slotting into the roles as you were hoping to see. So if that takes trying to cycle through some of those guys from Memphis sooner than later to be able to get that, even if those guys that we feel decent confidence in hold serve, it's either the guys that you're kind of questioning right now pick it up, or somebody else replaces them to pick it up, and you hope to find it. I just don't know that indicates this bullpen's going to be quite the same as it was last year. And what does that mean for the team as a whole? Well, if you picked it up offensively, you could be in good shape. But again, with the rotation, let's take a look at that. I said Sonny Gray, 3.8 ERA. I think he can replicate last year's Sonny Gray. I think he can do that, even though, the numbers are a little bit lesser right now. I think we're seeing some really good signs from him. If you throw out the seventh inning, which I know you can't do, but if you did, his ERA would be drastically different. It'd be like below 3. So feeling pretty much fine about Sonny Gray still. Erick Fedde, man, I don't know. That Boston lineup is a really good one. We talked about this on the big show. I posted the clip earlier to the YouTube channel. You look at that lineup from the Twins from over the weekend, and then you look at the one that the Red Sox threw at you today. Those are different lineups, folks. Like the Red Sox have some dudes. The Twins just might not be very good. And if they are good, it's not necessarily going to be because of their offense. I just don't think that they're very deep. And the Cardinals swept that team, and you go, all right, like things are off to a great start. They played a really good brand of baseball. What if they did so against a team that's going to lose, 85, 90 games themselves and not be as competitive in the AL Central as the Twins are hoping to be? All right, then suddenly you can put 2 and 2 together and go, all right, it might have been a little bit of a mirage there, what the Cardinal pitching staff was able to do early on, because they struggled, too, against the Angels, a lineup that I don't think is very good. Like, I thought the Angels would be worse than the Twins coming into the year, and they ended up taking 2 of 3 from you, and offensively they were able to do just about plenty in each of those games, even the one that they ended up losing. So, I don't know, man. Now you're playing a team that I think has a championship caliber lineup. Christian Campbell is an absolute dude. Apologies to Justin from my fantasy league. He's been trying to get Christian Campbell from me all week, and finally tonight I said, I just don't think I can do it. Guy might be one of my best players on my team and a very cheap keeper. So taking a look at, what that means for maybe the Cardinals as they have to face some other good lineups, we're going to find out whether this pitching staff can hold up. But I'm thinking the bullpen's going to be a little bit lesser going through this rotation. Gray could be about what he was. Fedde, good against a bad lineup. Today, not as good against a better lineup. Is he an ERA in the 3s guy, or is it going to be more like in the low 4s? Because last year he was 3.7 with the Cardinals, and people didn't think that was good enough because they said, he didn't really settle in very well with the Cardinals. His numbers were actually pretty solid. So, I mean, I'd like to think, okay, Fedde will figure it out. He's a veteran. He'll have some bad outings like this one, but he'll lock it back in for the others and make the adjustments necessary. Time's going to tell. It's going to be interesting. These next 2 days, I think, are going to be particularly informative in terms of like the early vibes on the rotation. You've got Palante and Michaelis going against that same Boston lineup, and these are 2 guys that are pitched to contact, and Boston was hitting the ball pretty hard and hitting the ball all over the yard. So do they follow it up? Because Palante, after his first outing, 3.6 ERA, Michaelis 3.38. Both of them did a nice job. Palante could have probably gone even deeper if not for a rain delay that came in during his outing. If those guys, though, have a similar one to Fedde, what are we thinking about this Cardinals pitching staff in 2 days? Because not only are you going to then have questions about the rotation going, well, 2, 3, and 4 just got shelled by the first real lineup that you saw all year. The bullpen's already been, kind of iffy. And if you don't get those guys deep into games, like someone like Michaelis, man, that's a Sunday Night Baseball. If he doesn't have it going on, he might have to wear it because of the nature of how the bullpen is, already being taxed. You just had an off day on Thursday, but you used about half your bullpen today, and nobody came away from it feeling particularly good. So we'll see what happens with that. Palante, though, is another, it'd be great to get him another solid outing so that you can at least kind of say, all right, Sonny Gray is going to be all right. We know that Palante is trending in the right direction. Michaelis, we'll see, man. Like, he got good results in that first one, but having to put those together, it just feels like if the Fedde outing on Friday is any indication, Michaelis is going to maybe have a little bit of a tricky time because this is a team that can barely you up. So take a look at what that looks like on Sunday night. And then, of course, it'll be Liberatore. We'll get a chance to see him. I guess it'll be in Pittsburgh before he starts again. And like it felt like even he was teetering in that first outing. If you wanted to take maybe a more pessimistic view on the guy that goes 95, 96 in the first, and he's down to maybe 94, 95 miles per hour on the fastball in the second. And then third, he's right in that hitting zone, like 93, and gives up 4 straight hits to right-handed hitters. And you're feeling like that's going to go off the rails. He brought it back and deserves a lot of credit for doing so. How does he follow it up, though, outing to outing? You're looking for positive signs over these next 3 days in terms of wrapping up turn number 2 through the rotation, because if you don't get them, you can start to really see how the Cardinals are going to be searching for answers sooner rather than later. And I don't know where the answers are necessarily going to come from. You're hoping that they're going to come from the guys that are right here. Eventually, yeah, they're going to be more aggressive when it comes to deciding, all right, how we get McGreevy in the rotation if he looks this good. And, like, he should probably be up here. I'll tell you this, I would not have a very long leash. If you go through this turn through the rotation and everybody's getting shelled, I don't know that you're necessarily, like, kicking anybody permanently to the curb, but you're figuring out a way to get McGreevy up here and shuffle in the deck however you need to. If you go a second turn through the rotation and everything kind of reverts back from what they had done the first time through, when really all 5 guys looked good, and I'd say all 6 guys, because I'll include Steven Matz and his relief appearance of Palante the last time. So we'll see what ends up happening. I think these are 3 important starts coming up. It's not like, there's a long season to go. But when we talk about the Cardinals every day and you're trying to identify, like, what are the vibes of the team right now, I think you certainly want to not get into a rut this early when it comes to pitching. And if not for the way that 8th inning went on Wednesday when they piled up 7 runs and were able to make sure they got that win, escaping the Angels series without getting swept, like, you really feel like the vibes are kind of in the toilet right now. So they could turn it around. Momentum is only as good as your next day's starting pitcher, of course, but your next day's starting pitcher is going to have to get the job done to get the momentum back in the Cardinals' corner. Otherwise, you're kind of looking up and down the pitching staff going, oh, boy, maybe they do have to win 8-7 every game if this is to continue. It's only based on what they've done the past few days. I'm not necessarily saying I'm out on all these guys in terms of my opinion on the team, but right now you can see the way it's trending, and it didn't take very long for that to go from, hey, feeling pretty good about the pitching, to now it's like, well, wait a minute, this might be what a lot of people were concerned about. And I'm not saying that there was anything the front office necessarily should have done all too differently, because this is going to be a year about finding out about your internal options. And listen, if you've got veterans that aren't performing, you find a way to get rid of those veterans sooner rather than later, and then you make room that way for the young guys that can then come up and either show that they're fit for the role or that they aren't, so that by 2026, you know kind of where you're at. And if you need to add free agents, or if you're still not really that ready to compete because of how poorly 2025 went, you go, all right, throw the young guys out there for another year, but recognize that we can probably expect we're not really going too far too quick. And then just be aware of your surroundings and aware of what your expectations would be. But this is a season where I think you'll, at least by the end of it, have seen a lot of McGreevy. Hopefully you'll have even seen some Quinn Matthews. Hopefully seen a decent amount of Graceffo, and be able to kind of know going into the next year, here's what I can reasonably expect from this group of players. Tink Hent's on the injured list doesn't help. You'd like to think that you could get a look at him, but again, he's going to have to pitch. And that's kind of what I said in the offseason. He's kind of on the back burner until we see him log enough innings to be considered. He's got great stuff, but has not been able to keep healthy, and I don't think we're going to see him for quite a while. So those are sorts of the questions and the commentaries that are rolling around in my head. Let me know yours, Cardinals fans, in the comments below. And before you get out of here, make sure to give a like to the video and hit subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Consider joining the YouTube membership if you'd like to support the content we do here on B-Schaeff Daily in that way. 2 tiers of the membership, the second tier for which there is a private group chat on Discord that you can have access to if you sign up. So just let me know if you're interested in that. I can answer anybody's questions at b-schaefer12 on Twitter. And there's also the Discord that we've got rolling along, talking about all kinds of sports in the St. Louis and surrounding areas. But Cardinals Talk is first and foremost on the B-Schaeff Daily Discord. So appreciate you guys checking that out. The link is below, and it is free to join. Thank you guys so much for listening today and supporting the podcast. As always, we will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.